Welcome to Talent Titans, the podcast where we bring you entrepreneurs and leaders from the global staffing industry. I'm your host, Suki Sodi. Now let's jump right on in and welcome today's Titan. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Talent Titans. Today we are going to be talking mindset. And I have a very, very special guest with me today, Tracy Schreifels, the Executive Director of the Allison Center. Tracy, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. It's nice to be here. It's nice to see you again.
I'm really looking forward to what we unpack today. But before we start, you're not from the recruiting industry. Tell us more about who you are.
Definitely. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have been working in the field of early childhood mental health for about 25 years. Started as a preschool teacher, actually, and then went back to school. And in about 2018, a group of colleagues and I started realizing that there was a missing need in our community to really work with parents that were really struggling with their kids. And so we actually worked towards opening a nonprofit. And in case this date rings a bell to anybody, we opened in March of 2020 at the beginning of a pandemic.
Wow.
Yes. So it started with myself and one other clinician, and I now have a team of 11 that I oversee and supervise, and an agency that's definitely growing and sustainable.
I was going to say amazing, but that didn't quite sound right because of what you do, right? But here's the thing. And the reason I wanted to talk to you today is mental health is so important. And often, and we'll unpack this further, what as the adult version of me, some of the things that trigger me, I have learned, I can trace them back to earlier in life. Mm-hmm. So although you're working early childhood parenting and what have you, this is going to be so relevant to what I want to talk about today. So you're not from the staffing industry, which I love. You were at the Canadian Staffing Summit. That was your very first in-person exposure to the industry. What did you think? What did you, as a mental health expert, mm-hmm. what were some of your thoughts and what did you walk away with?
Great question. I actually did quite a bit of thinking and processing on that. Even as I was there, I went actually back and took a look at my notes, and I was like, "Oh yes." And the first thing I think I noticed is that the struggles that are happening in your world of work are very similar to the struggles I see happening in the families and in the professionals that I work with as well. So that human experience goes across whatever career or job path it takes us to. That was one of the things I noticed. The other thing that I kept thinking about is in my field, we use something called reflective consultation, which is a form of self-care, actually, that we use with ourselves and within teams. And I kept thinking like, oh, they need reflective consultation. Like they need a place to go process what's coming up in this work, which is exactly what reflective consultation is. It's a place to process the emotional stuff that comes with the work that we do so that we can go back out with a full cup again and be able to do the work more efficiently and more effectively. So those are things that really stuck out to me as I was listening. I was like, okay, this is interesting.
Well, we're going to unpack a little bit of that. But I mean, look, this industry, we are salespeople. Mm-hmm. And even by very nature of the industry we are in, so we're salespeople, but we're in recruiting. And I always say we have two clients, but only one pays the invoice, i.e. the company that's hiring. And secondly, our candidates and clients have free will, so they can change their mind. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes people don't show up for jobs that they have accepted, signed, sealed, accepted. And you can't literally go and say, no, you accepted this, you are forced to work. So which has a massive impact on our industry, on individuals at all levels, but also now throw in the current climate. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've got the T word, tariffs. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter where in the world someone's tuning in on this, it's impacting them one way or another. When you were here, we were just in the midst of a general election.
Yes.
Okay. We're just coming out. When I say just coming out, so COVID, and then we had that massive spike and then down. And so many ways we're still feeling the tail end of that from a business perspective.
Mhm.
We've got this huge, no, I'm only going to work from home, where companies are like, no, we need hybrid. So is it any wonder that as an industry, executives are stressed out?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you're also in the relationship business, right?
Yeah,
Like recruiting requires relationships, and relationships will wake up our past experiences, and it also wakes up our early experiences of relationships with our own parents. So we by
interesting.
nature, yeah, by nature, by being in relationship with somebody, you are actually waking up their attachment system, which brings with it all sorts of interesting things. And then you add in all the stress that you're mentioning, and the fact that I would say most of us haven't actually processed the global pandemic. We have not processed that as a collective trauma. We kind of are pretending like it just didn't happen and we aren't growing through it. So then we actually have tension internally because of that, which continues to make it more stressful.
Elaborate on that, because you just said so much in such a short period of time. We haven't processed the implications, the aftermath of COVID. Anybody listening is going to say, what are you talking about? COVID was, what was it,
Five
4 years
years
ago?
ago.
Yeah, 5 years
5 years
ago. Done,
ago.
dusted. It's not in my system. That kind of stuff. So let's elaborate on that one a little bit more.
So, for example, I would recommend people to check your system. Go and watch an episode of a show that was recorded during COVID. There are lots of TV shows that had like specific, like Grey's Anatomy. They had all of the special gear on. People were dying from it. They had, right? You go back and see those images and hear those stories again. And most of us actually get quite triggered. We get really stirred up. Most people actually want to avoid watching those episodes. That's a trauma response. Avoidance is a trauma response. So it's being triggered by something when we were reminded of it. So
Interesting.
it's still there. It's still activated. It's just like we are kind of like, oh, it's in the past, and we want to pretend like it's not there, but we actually haven't gone back and been like, what was that like for me? What changes happened as a result of that? How have I grown through this? What grief might I have to process about what that world and that time period looked like? We
That's
haven't
really interesting, because I admit I'm one of the people you just described. It was done. It was a horrible time, but yeah, you're right, because the very nature of, I guess, every entrepreneur is going to be able to relate to this, regardless of what sector, in recruiting, mining, music, doesn't matter what it is. We're forward looking for the most part, right? And in the middle of a traumatic period, regardless of, or a stressful period, whether it's COVID, whether it's the election, whether it's the tariff talks, whether it's the economy, we automatically go to, how do I get through this? So that self care piece kind of gets forgotten or gets put on the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
And we end up sitting there thinking we're doing the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, what do you say to that?
So first of all, this is my own little personal part, but I actually the word self care drives me nuts.
Oh, I like that. Come on,
Yeah, it just drives me
let's talk
nuts.
about it.
Hmm. So one of the reasons that it drives me nuts is it puts all of the weight and responsibility on ourselves. Which I don't know about you, but I already have a big to do list. So self care is now on my list, and I'm not getting to it either. So it's one more thing I'm not doing well. It's kind of how it ends up feeling because we know we're supposed to do it, just like getting good sleep and eating and exercising. But how often is it that we're like, oh, I should be doing that, and then the shoulds wake up all sorts of shame sometimes or guilt, and then when we're stressed, we're like, oh, if I had done self care, I would have taken care of this. So I actually like to call it self responsibility. I think we have a
Okay.
responsibility to take care of ourselves and to have self awareness of how we're feeling and what we're experiencing so that we can actually process it in the moment and not just like when I go away for a weekend, because self-care is really designed to create a life you don't have to escape from.
Okay, so because you saw my expression, I was like, oh, I don't know where this is going.
Uh-huh.
Because as you were talking, don't like self care, I instantly thought, oh God, she's going to say it's the employer's responsibility, it's the manager's responsibility. But that's not what you're saying. Yes, there is an element that they have to do, company has to provide, and
Definitely.
what have you. But I want to unpack this one a little bit more. So, I'm a salesperson. I'm an executive. You like everybody you met at the summit was either an owner or C-suite, right? Responsible for people, business. And what I always find is I don't think this is just an industry thing, but what I always find is people think, no, the higher up the ladder you are, they don't kind of associate mental health, self care there. In fact, it's seen that the leader, that executive, is the one that should be worrying about everyone's well being.
Mhm.
What do you say to that?
Oh, wouldn't it be lovely if somebody took care of everything for us?
Yeah. That'd be great, right?
Right. Right. I think there's some shared responsibility, right? I think as executives, you are setting a tone, you're setting a pace. I'm also an executive director. I set the tone and pace for my team as well, even though we're a team of clinicians. That doesn't always mean that we're well. That doesn't always mean that don't have stress going on. So as an executive, I believe that we need to have our finger on the pulse of what's going on. And I think we need to be aware of what's going on. Um, I think we need to make sure that we are creating workloads that are reasonable and are providing the resources that are needed. But we can provide all of those things, but if the employees aren't using them or if they aren't working within them, like where do we go then? There's no fault in this. This is just a matter of how are we going to figure this out? It's one of those problems to solve. Finger pointing and blame is a dead end street. We don't get anywhere if we're blaming other people.
I agree with you.
Hmm.
I agree. However, I talk to so many people
Hmm.
who, and admittedly, it's not the same volume now as it was during the pandemic and the initial aftermath. Who it's always the employer's fault.
Hmm.
It's always the employer. They're putting too much pressure on me. They're doing this. They're doing that. They don't seem to. And again, generalizing, sweeping statement. But there's so many people that just don't own, to your word, was it self responsibility?
Hmm.
Don't
Hmm.
own that. And it ends up, and it just puts extra pressure on the leader because now suddenly he or she has got this problem over here. Why
Hmm.
do you think some people won't own it? Because here's the thing, a employee employer relationship is pretty simple in its basic terms. I, the employer, am paying you, Tracy, the employee, X thousand dollars a year in return. So I'm giving you that, plus I'm
Hmm.
giving you the safe work environment, plus I'm giving you a laptop, plus whatever else that plus might be. In return, you are, and I'm going to come back to my world because that's the world I know. You
Hmm.
are going to make 4 contracting placements a month minimum. You're going to make 2 direct hire, whatever that might be. And
Hmm.
if that doesn't happen, we kind of have a problem because if you don't hit your part of the bargain, I
Hmm.
can't suddenly say, sorry, I'm not paying you this month.
Right. I'm required to pay you
Yeah,
regardless. Yeah.
exactly. But what I hear time and time, and then that quote unquote pressure is applied because now the manager has to figure out why, what's happening, training need, what is it, whatever that might be. And that's where some employees are pushing back and they call it micromanager and then they get stressed.
Hmm.
So in the scenario that I've given him, and please, before somebody jumps down my throat listening to this, I'm not saying this is the case every time. There are some really, really shitty, lousy managers out there.
Hmm.
But there, in this case, that's not who I'm talking about. So, I mean, I've got 2 questions on that one. What are some of the things that employee needs to do? And then as a leader, how is he or she going to be able to protect their mental well-being, because now this is just extra pressure, because now this person is complaining to HR that I as a leader am putting too much pressure on them. So long-winded question, go for it.
Something I have found can be really helpful is taking the word mental health out of it and replacing it with physical health.
Okay.
Okay, just doesn't follow me here. So if that employee was having a physical health issue, as the employer, what would the responsibility be as the employer in that situation? And what would be the employee's responsibility? Oftentimes when we do this in physical health, it's actually a little cleaner for us because we're like, oh, if they bring a doctor's note in, I have to accommodate. Or if they bring in, right, like there's some clarity sometimes around what those specific accommodations might need to look like. How does their job need to be altered for a while they have broken arms or something, right? Like it's much more clear.
Yep.
And so something that we can do is think about how do we then apply it to mental health, which is another form of health. So if you have somebody who is struggling with mental health, they just like you can't fix their broken arms, they might need to go get help for that. And they might need to have an adjustment made to their position for a little while they're struggling with something. But those can be things then that are monitored by a professional or by somebody outside of the work that is kind of helping bridge. How do you go back and do your work effectively? So sometimes when we think about it from a physical health piece, it makes it much more concrete and it actually takes a lot of judgment out of it because we're like, well, yeah, if you have broken arms, right? I can't expect you to type right now. Mm-hmm. So how do I need to have somebody type for you? Do we do some sort of talk to text, right? We would just figure that out. So if you have an employee who's coming in who might have significant grief or might have depression or might have anxiety that's getting in the way, we have a tendency, and I would say this is still due to a lot of stigma, that you should know how to control that. You should not let those symptoms bother you. You should, and there's truth in that. And the reality is that takes a lot of time and energy in order to learn how to manage. Just like it takes a ton of time and energy to heal from broken bones. So sometimes we need time and space to do that healing work. But that's much different. Doing healing work is much different than I'm just going to take a couple of days off. That could be part of it, but I still might need to get some additional help on some level.
So, okay, so playing devil's advocate here. Mm-hmm. That's all, and I agree, right? So I'm not disagreeing with that. But what about those individuals that just aren't aware that they need help? And they are just internalizing, and oh God, I'm definitely going to get shut down for this one, but where they're not doing their job for whatever reason, forget the whys and wherefores, leader is putting pressure on. That is then creating an environment of stress for them, which I totally understand, right? Yes. So I get that bit, but they're doing nothing about improving their job. Instead, they're just, oh my God, I'm being micromanaged. That's an awful leader. That's why I can't do my job. Rather than looking at it and saying, actually, you know what? He or she is right. Going back to that earlier example I gave you, they're paying me X in return for Y, and I'm not delivering Y. So I need to understand why I'm not delivering Y. Mm-hmm. Why do people not think of it like that?
Wouldn't that be lovely if they did? It'd be so much easier. Wouldn't it be lovely? Yeah. I think that goes back to the lack of self-awareness.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of people who don't necessarily see their part in those situations. There's also themes, I think, where there is kind of this idea that your employer should make work easy for you, or they should take care of everything for you so that it's easy for you. And I think that there's a lot of times that it's just easier to put that on somebody else than it is to acknowledge that I'm not doing something well. Right? It's hard as a human to acknowledge and name like, wow, I really screwed that up. Or it's my fault that my sales aren't where they're at. I would much rather blame somebody else because then I don't have to look at myself. I don't have to work on myself. I don't have to change myself. So as long as I have somebody else to blame, I don't have to do that internal reflection. I don't have to do that internal growth. So it'd be interesting to think about then with our executives that are hearing this from their staff or from how could we actually step into that conversation differently? How could we
Now,
lean
you've
into
just
it?
said step into a minefield. In my mind, that
Mm-hmm.
just went my field, right? Because you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, is the way I think about it. And it's such a delicate topic.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health is very, very dear to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, I've had personal loss. My brother died of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I know the impact mental health has. So I don't want anyone to think I'm being dismissive. But I guess, again, coming back to my personal part, I want those people to get help, not these ones over here that are quote unquote using it as an excuse,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, I know people are listening to this and I'm going to get some backlash for saying that. I know I am. But there's a big, if you listen to what I'm saying, there are those that are genuinely, genuinely struggling and they need the help and support that's on offer.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is, there are those that just simply say, I'm stressed, I'm going on stress leave because I want to avoid work. What
Mm-hmm.
can they do about it? You said that self-reflection piece. What can they do? Where should they start? Because this is something, this is going to become a pattern, isn't it? Or it's
Mm-hmm.
already a pattern.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying what should executives do in that, or what should
What does an
employees?
executive do in that case? And also, because you said step into the conversation and I interrupted and said minefield, but also as the person, as the individual who's
Mm-hmm.
not owning this, not owning their role in this.
Yeah, I guess I'd be curious as we're talking about this. I'd be curious to think about other skills that they might be missing. So, managing your stress is a skill. It's something that we can learn and grow in. I'm assuming sales is something that is a skill that you can learn and grow in, right?
Yeah.
Managing your time, organizing, all of those types of things are skills. So, how are those executives stepping into when they're missing other skills? How are they leaning in? How are they supporting them? If they are, you can hire somebody and they can sound amazing on paper. They can do a great interview. You get them into work for you, and you're like, are you the person I hired? Because this does not seem to match.
Yep.
Right? And then you're like, okay, now I either have some skill development to do here. And then if I am, what does that course look like in order to get them up to being able to do this? Or I go, okay, most of these things are doing okay. It's this area, right? So I bring support in this area. That might be a training, that might be coaching, that might be, right? We would bring those resources in. So managing your stress is another skill. So how do we teach how to manage their stress so that they don't have to continue to take leave? Or so they don't, so they can stay in the work rather than stepping away from it.
So how do you teach someone to manage stress?
It's a great question. That'd be interesting to go back and think about, how did we learn how to manage stress? Like even on a personal level, right? For people to think about, like, how well do I manage my own stress? For those who are listening, maybe this is an opportunity for some self-reflection yourself too. But oftentimes learning to manage stress is something that we learned because we watched our parents do it while we were growing up.
Okay.
Okay. So this is one of those family patterns, much like eating and recipes that we pass on. How to manage our emotions, how to cope with stress, all of that is also often passed on in those family dynamics that we've grown up in. So if I saw my parents every time they got stressed and overwhelmed and they took a weekend away and they went out drinking for the weekend, I might see that in order to take care of your stress, you have a party or you go drink or you do something like that. I might have seen my parent completely shut down and they didn't cook, they didn't do anything, they just shut down and they weren't even available to me. I might think that's how you handle stress. So we grow up with these experiences, and then sometimes we see somebody else and we see them doing it differently and we go, oh, that's not how my mom, dad does it. And we think that might feel better. I might want to learn their way instead. This happens with parenting. This happens with exercising. This happens with where we choose to go to school or what jobs we go into, right? All of those things are nurtured in those first relationships that we have. And then the rest of our life is spent reflecting on them and growing through them.
That's a really interesting, you're right, because it's like, how did my parents deal with it?
Mm-hmm.
I thinking of my mum just worked through it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I tend to do, just
Mm-hmm.
work through it. Doesn't mean she got to the end result. She got the end, the other side. But now, as I'm thinking about it, Yeah, so when I do that, do I always come out the other side stronger? No, I come out the other side,
Mm-hmm.
right? But what cuts and bruises did I take along the way? So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so I, as a leader, can't say to anybody in my team, I think you need to do some self reflection. You don't manage stress well. So, what can individuals that aren't even thinking that, haven't connected that dot, quote unquote, how do they start? I mean, are we literally just saying here, and maybe this is a dumb question, but are you literally just saying, sit down and say, how do I handle stress? How am I handling this situation? Maybe take stress out of it, this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And where did I learn to handle this situation like this?
Right. When has that come up in the past? Where have I seen that happen in the past?
That sounds really easy, but it's not.
It's not easy, but it can be easy. So, what I have found is that when workplaces, so think all the way back to the hiring part of the process. So, when you start by hiring somebody, like you said, we're setting up a contract. You're going to do these things and I will pay you this much, right? Well, at the beginning of those, if we actually also talked about part of what we're also going to keep in mind is how well you're managing your stress, how your own triggers might be getting in the way of things. Like if that was actually talked about up front, that this is part of what we think about and do here, how different could that make it be if that was actually just part of the conversation?
I think you've just given every HR leader a
A
heart
nightmare?
attack. Yeah,
I know.
nightmare heart
I know.
attack just listening to that
Mhm.
because it's so, what's the word I'm looking for? Like that sounds great on paper,
Mhm.
right? But now, as you were saying that, I was like, yeah, that makes logical sense on paper. But now I don't hire that person and I choose to go with that person. Have I now created a legal loophole for this person to say they discriminated, right? So
Mhm.
I get it. I get it. What you're saying, but the truth of the matter is in practice, that is not as easy to do.
Right.
And maybe where it sits, because I do like what you're saying, maybe where it sits is in the orientation, the onboarding.
I was going to say, usually that sits with the supervisor, like their
Okay.
direct supervisor. So that would be something like in those initial meetings or whoever's training them or onboarding them. That might be part of the onboarding process, not usually part of the hiring process, but it's now that we've hired you and we've had this contract set up and this is the work you're going to be doing. Here's another part of how we think about this work or another part of what we are going to be considering. Stepping into those conversations is not the same as stepping into mental health conversations.
Yeah. Because the way you've just, I love this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, podcast over. We've done. We've solved everyone's problems, right? No, but I love this because now I brought somebody into my team. I'm now saying, right,
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't use these words, but just really simplifying it. Life happens. There's going to be highs, lows. This
Mm-hmm.
is how, as a business, we lean into this. This is how we need you to think about it, whatever that process might be. This is what we're going to do. Because now that's not a, because we're at interview stage, you ask somebody that or you bring that topic up. Half the time, people aren't going to tell you
Right.
because we
Well,
can we can all play a role for half an
right. It
hour.
goes back to the physical part. We don't ask about people's physical limitations either during an interview, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So similar, right? Again, if we put that physical and social, emotional, mental health part together, we wouldn't ask about those things in an interview.
So I think you've kind of answered this one, but I'm going to go back to it. A company's making it harder than it needs to be. You're nodding, so you're agreeing.
I'm thinking for a second here.
Okay.
Our companies make it harder. I wonder if that's actually a bigger question. Like, how many
Okay.
of us are actually making it harder than it has to be? It takes more energy to suppress emotions than it does to experience them and process them. So we actually spend more energy to hold my emotions back instead of just being able to lean in and say, wow, that really upset me or that really made me angry. Okay, let's get through this, right? That takes a lot less energy than it actually does to be like, I'm going to show that I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. So it's interesting to think about how we're using that energy or where are we putting that energy? Are we making it more complicated? Are we so I'm also sitting right now with my mental health mind and how different we approach these things in our field. That these are real natural conversations for us to have. And I'm thinking about these are conversations that might be helpful for other executives and supervisors to know how to have.
Oh, yes.
Hmm.
Because I tell you what, somebody says to me to have that conversation, I'm straight on the, I'd be straight on the phone to my HR girl and say, Trish, get in here, we need to have this conversation, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm not equipped, I don't feel equipped
Hmm.
to have that conversation,
Hmm.
right? Especially if you uncover something bad,
Right, right. I
right?
think that's one of the reasons we actually stay away from it is we're afraid to have somebody disclose something very big or traumatic or right, because then we're like, now what do I do with it? We feel responsible then to do something with it.
And you're triggered.
Oh yeah, you yourself might be triggered. One of the other things that was mentioned at the summit was like PTSD for salespeople or the trauma
Yeah.
dumping that happens, and I was like, oh yeah, that happens everywhere, doesn't it? Like that's real.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, in my work, we know we're going to be meeting with clients, and that's what the clients are supposed to be doing. So we've been trained and we've been taught how to hold those things a little bit separate from who we are. We often say we can be caring without carrying all of what's being told to us.
Caring without carrying. I
Hmm.
like that. Because as you
Hmm.
were talking, and this is something I've learned,
Hmm.
right? I now, more often than not, I'd be lying if I said every single time, I've now learned to just pause and say, why did that trigger me? It
Yes.
took me a long time to learn to do that
Hmm.
because you don't like because I can lie to you, I can't lie to myself.
Yes.
And I try, and sometimes I may miss it. And just because right now I want a pity party. So I'm not going to do any self reflection. I'm just going to say, he triggered me because he done this and what have you. But it's really being able to sit back and say, why is that triggering me? What is it reminding me of? And the truth of the matter is sometimes I don't have the answer, but just that moment of pause, that would be enough for me to be able to take a breath and come back to it. And sometimes I'd go back to it a week later, 2 weeks later, and say,
Hmm.
okay, now I'm in a different frame of mind. What was that all about?
Yeah, and sometimes it might not have been about the situation. It might have been how somebody said something. It might have been a tone of voice. It might
That's
have
a big
been,
one for me.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the big question then is, like you said, the pause. The pause is one of the things that I feel like we actually skip over. Most people skip over. So they just plow through it. Like I just am going to pretend that didn't happen. I'm not triggered. I'm fine. But we're actually not. Like we're hiding it or we're, withholding it. And then we're sitting with it. But the pause gives us this moment to go like, whoa, is this about the work right now? Is this about like what's this about? Oh, this is about something that happened outside of work. Okay, I'm going to set this aside so when I leave work, I can go process that. I can take care of that. No different than, man, I need to go pick up these things for groceries, which randomly pop up while you're working, right? But we
Yep.
don't say I'm going to go do that right now. We might say I'm going to write it down so I remember it later, but we don't necessarily go do it right now. So sometimes those personal things when they come up, if we can do the pause and be like, "Oh, I have to think about this some more." We might be pinning that to do that at a different time. Right now, while I'm doing this work, might not be the best time to do it.
I love that because you're right, because we have a million thoughts while we're working,
Yes.
and half of them are probably nothing to do with work.
Hmm.
To your point that you remember this, you remember that.
Hmm.
And, you could have had an argument with your husband, wife, partner that
Yeah.
morning. Traffic. I know for me, if I get caught in traffic, I get so irritated. And that's one where I've had to learn to pause and say, what can you do about it?
Hmm.
Right? There's nothing I can do about it. I
Right.
am in traffic, but that I used to get really triggered and irritated. Now I just use that time to return calls.
Hmm.
So it's funny because, as you know, other than my husband, kids, all my family's in the UK, and they'll get a call from me sometimes in the afternoon. They'll be like, "She's in traffic," because then I'm thinking, okay, so how else am I going to use this
Yeah.
time? It
Yeah.
wasn't because there's nothing I can do about the traffic. But you
Yeah.
said
Getting mad at them from your car doesn't make them go faster
no,
or move out of the way.
no, and you've got a jerk in the lane next to you. Well, if you react, who knows which way that's going to go. But you said, I think you are onto something here, and I just want to unpack it a little bit more. So something happens at work. Your boss said something. Your client said something. Candidate chose not to turn up. Whatever that might be, and it's triggered you,
Mm-hmm.
and you pause. How easily do people connect the dot that this is not to do with work? This is to do with something outside of work. So the reason I'm asking this is, so somebody's going through listening to this right now and they're like, I'm going to practice it. And they practice it twice today and they can't, because I couldn't, I could
Mm-hmm.
pause when I first started doing this, but all I could remember was the other person in the moment, the trigger.
Right, because our brain is actually wired to stay, that is considered a threat. So now your stress response system wakes up and sees that as a threat. And so to set it aside is actually kind of goes against our biological, needs for safety. So the pause, especially when you're learning or this is something new that you're going to practice, the pause is actually to say, like, what's this stirring up in me right now? Or what am I feeling? That magical F word that some people don't like to talk about. But like, what's the emotion coming up, or where do I feel it in my body? So it might not even be at the beginning about, is this work related or not work related? The first step is actually learning to regulate in the moment. Like, how do I notice what this thing is and name it and go, man, that really pissed me off. Or, oh, that hit a sad spot, right? And then be able to name that. And then you can say, what do I have to do with this? So the beginning of it has to do with pausing and noticing the emotion and actually just naming it. Sometimes you have to name it to tame it. So if we don't name the emotion, we actually have a tendency to spiral with it more and stir with it more and actually create more stress and anxiety around it.
So, is it fair to say anyone that's going through something right now as they're listening to this, just if all you do is name, beg your pardon, pause
Hmm.
and name, you've moved forward.
You have. You're learning a new skill and you're implementing a new skill, and it
So,
will continue to get stronger.
okay, so maybe just for the next, I don't know, month, that's all you're doing.
Hmm.
Because that, thinking back, that then has a very positive impact on the rest of your day. You
Yeah.
talked earlier on about trigger.
Hmm.
When I was saying, yeah, my mum would just go through stuff. Actually, my dad did as well, for that matter, right? Knuckle down, let's get through this. You're now reflecting it back, and you're like, oh, and that trigger could be from anywhere, your childhood, something
Hmm.
somebody said, an innocent comment that hit you the wrong way,
Completely. Hmm.
right? Seeing your ex, anything could do it, right? So how do you recognize where it's coming from? So, and then let me rephrase that. Because sometimes, or certainly when I was doing this, I'd find the easiest, nearest thing. Oh, yeah, that happened yesterday. That's why I'm triggered. But the truth of the matter is, it wasn't that. I had layers to peel back
Hmm.
before I would get to what was really triggering me,
Hmm.
like the real trigger.
The real
Um,
trigger. Hmm.
is that the stage where you would say, look, you've got to seek professional help before you start unpacking all of those layers? I mean, where does it become how does somebody decide, I need an expert here versus, you know what, I can do this, I've got it?
Right. I'm slightly biased, so I'm going to name that. I think everybody should have a therapist. Not everybody needs them at the same frequency as each other, but having somebody to go and talk and process with is kind of that next step of self-awareness and growth, is to be able to process. It doesn't always have to be a therapist. It could be a good friend. It could be a confidant. It could be a really good coach. Like, there's lots of ways to do that. But as we talked about the pause and the naming of what you're experiencing and even just regulating, oftentimes you'll start to realize if there's a pattern. Oh, I have to do this more often on Fridays. What is it about Friday or going into the weekend that is maybe stirring me up? Or you'll notice it's more with a certain person or maybe with a certain group of people, or like you start to take notice then of potential patterns. The patterns then lead us down the path of understanding that that might be a trigger for us. And if it is named to be a trigger, then there needs to be some discovery as to what's underneath that. a lot of people assume that if you name a trigger, you have to go down and do the deep trauma work. And it's certainly helpful, but it's not required in order to do the healing. There's other ways to do that work without having to, like, I know a lot of people are like, I don't want to go to therapy and talk about all that stuff. It's like,
There's
you
a
actually don't
stigma,
have, there's a stigma to it, and they know it's going to hurt, and they know it's going to
especially
be
middle-aged
painful.
men.
Oh, yes. And they were taught not to feel those things or to pretend like they're fine or whatever, like men don't have those big emotions.
Yeah, man
They're
up.
strong. They're strong. Yeah, man up. Minnesota, pull up your bootstraps is a very common one we hear here. So, the more there's more than one way to do that work, more than one way to do the healing work. And it doesn't always require you to do a deep dive into that experience that may have led to the trigger. It might be more on a body-based awareness. It might be a little bit more just in terms of, right, all right, when that trigger happens, what's the thought that comes with it? How is that thought impacting your action? How is that action impacting relationships? How is that impact, right? So sometimes it has more to do with changing your thought process around something, or kind of rewiring a different thought process. So instead of me assuming that they're being a jerk, which I might attach to like my ex, or somebody else, I might go like, oh, instead of thinking they're a jerk, maybe I think, wow, they're upset. How different does it feel if I say, wow, they're upset, instead of saying they're a jerk, right?
Actually, that's a good point.
I now respond differently because I have.
But jerk makes us feel better, right? Because they're the problem that way. I know we're
They're the
coming up to
problem.
time. I know we're
Yeah.
coming up to time, but I've got a couple of questions. One of the things I've learned to do, and this one was a hard one.
Mm-hmm.
How did I contribute to this situation? Right? As I admit, I'm still working on that one
Mm-hmm.
because that's a big one. It's like, what role did I play in this? And going back to the employer employee, right? Going back to, okay, I'm paying you X for Y revenue. I've
Mm-hmm.
not generated Y,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the role I played in that. But that's not the whole role I played in that. Why did I not? Because then it's like, why did I not generate that revenue? Well, and again, I'm keeping it really, really simple. I didn't do the work.
Mm-hmm.
One thing my fitness weightlifting coach, she always says, stop looking for the results of the work you didn't do.
Oh, wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, yeah. When she looks at my macro, she's like, well, are you surprised? You had wine. You had the. I was just like, yeah, okay. Right. So now I've started doing that during the day. So
Mm-hmm.
I now start looking at it and saying, okay, well, I didn't get that outcome that I wanted. Yeah, it's because I'm looking for what I'm actually getting is actually the result of the work I did do.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. So I think
Yep.
it's really important that we recognize that it's how we contribute to a situation. Like, yes, your boss could be a jerk. It could be a terrible manager. We're not denying any of that. That is a possibility. But the truth of the matter is, how did I contribute to the results on my desk,
Mm-hmm.
in my business, my team, whatever that might be? Is that a fair thing to tell people, ask yourself, how did I contribute to this? Or have we just opened up a massive can of worms?
I think that is a part of it, and the timing of it might be impactful in that too, right? If you have somebody who can't even manage their emotions when they're coming up, asking them how they contribute to something is probably not going to be really effective for either of you.
Okay.
Being able to say what got in the way of you doing the work.
It's all languaging, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Like, what got in
It's
the way? Like, why did you choose to have the wine? What was going on, right? Like let's have some understanding about what led to that. So if you want to change that behavior next time, right? You're like, oh, I was really overwhelmed. I was exhausted. I was, so I wanted a glass of wine, right? Then you might say, okay, so next time you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed, what could you do instead to have a different outcome? Let's look at right? Like, so it's kind of just, let's unpack it a little bit.
Yeah, that makes complete sense because just saying I never made the calls in our business,
Mm-hmm.
no, there's an even bigger problem. You probably weren't prepared for the calls. You didn't know who to call
Mm-hmm.
because unless you know who to call, you can't make the call, right? So it's just tracing it back. You said
Yeah.
earlier about if you don't want to talk to a therapist, talk to a friend. One of the things I'd done, and it's two in particular, and as they listen to this, they'll both know that I'm talking about them. One of the things I said to both of them was, don't sugarcoat. Tell me what the truth. Right. And that was really impactful for me, because when I first started doing this, my girlfriend in particular, she'd empathize. And, she's like, yeah, I get that. Right. Whereas the man, he'd be like, hold on a second. Hold on a second. I know you. It's like, oops. So I think that's important. If you are going to go down that friend, trusted family member, friend route, we give them the boundaries that we need them to play in.
It's kind of like having an accountability partner in some ways then, right? But we have to acknowledge, what do I need you to hold me accountable for? Let's make that clear. Like you're saying, no, be straight with me. Like tell it, like don't sugarcoat it. Give it to me straight, right? I would imagine that until you said that, it wasn't necessarily like you didn't have that verbal contract that made it safe for them to not sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
So they were like, oh, I better say this gently or kindly. I don't want to hurt her, right?
Yeah.
But now that you told me, like, don't sugarcoat it. All right. Remember when you told me not to sugarcoat? This is one of those moments. Like, are you ready?
Yeah, but there's times when it's just like, oh God, I wish I hadn't asked you that question now, right? Because I wasn't ready to hear that. But it's because we take, the truth of the matter is we can't separate our work from home. It is so entwined, especially now with work from home, whether you're hybrid or 100% work from home. We take our work home with us. And everybody talks about this work-life balance. I don't believe in work-life balance. There's an integration that needs to happen. Right? There's this integration that needs to happen, but ultimately you've got to own what you're doing, the role you're playing as a leader, as an employee. Truth of the matter is in any relationship. Okay, we have gone well over time. What are your final thoughts? What's your passing comments? I mean, you've had a week's exposure to our industry. What are your final thoughts?
Oh, good question. I think that
you've got so much you want to say, don't you?
I do. I think kind of going back to that experience of when I was sitting there, I noticed that there's a lot of influencing in the business world. Like there's a lot of talk about influencing. And oftentimes there is an appeal to emotions, or there's a use of scarcity. Like if you don't sign now, right, you might lose this.
Yep.
There's also the spinning of stories and some negotiation and things like that. And those are tools that we use in that field. And some of them might be connected to some of our own past experiences that are actually triggering or wakes up or integrates that stress response system. So I think there's this finding of the balance of leaning in and knowing the work that I do, but also leaning in and knowing who I am and what that's stirring up for myself. And we need to have space for both, to do both.
Amazing. So anybody listening to this and they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to reach out to you?
The best way to reach out to me is probably by email or directly through social media, my website or Facebook.
Perfect. I'll make sure I link them in the show notes. Tracy, thank you ever so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Talent Titans, brought to you by Recruitment Professional Forum, where they're building a grassroots community for professionals and leaders in the recruitment industry to collaborate, advocate, and advance the profession. If you liked or were inspired by what you heard, make sure to follow, subscribe, and even leave a review. It lets more talented recruiters like you find the show. Until next time, keep on being a talent titan.